Hey guys, what is up? Welcome back to my channel. So today I am going to be telling you guys a very interesting murder case that I just find to be so fascinating, and also it happened so close to where I live now that I found it significant and very interesting and something that hasn't been widely talked about, so I decided that I was going to talk about it today. So today I'm going to be talking about the murder of Susan Bailey, who was actually murdered in Roanoke, Texas by her children. So I'm going to probably end up splitting this video up into two parts, because in this video I'm going to talk about all the history and everything about the family and everything leading up to the murder, and then in the second part I will talk about the actual murder and the charges and everything that came after the murders. So I just think that it'll be way too long to compile it all into one video. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. I'm so fascinated by these cases. I love talking about all this creepy, like solving murder cases and just everything. It's so interesting to me. So definitely give this video a thumbs up if you want to hear more stories like this, and don't forget to subscribe. The button will be down below, and you should subscribe and become a member of our family so that you can see all the latest videos when I post them. And with that, let's get on into the story. So we're going to start off with the history. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Susan Bailey herself. So Susan Bailey was actually 43 when she was murdered. She grew up in Minnesota, which is actually kind of close to Wyoming. So she definitely grew up in the north where it was cold, definitely a lot different than the Texas environment that she eventually lived in. She always knew, though, she always said she was going to go to California. She knew she hated the snow, everything leading up, and she knew one day after she graduated high school she was going to California. So eventually she did move to California, and she was always known to be very caring and very selfless and always cared about other people. She was described by her friends as a really good friend and a really easy person to get along with. She was also really into fashion and clothing and designing and everything, and she knew that's what she wanted to do. So she actually went to college in Minnesota for that, and then eventually moved out to California to work in bigger retail stores and things like that, where she actually did and was a manager of a very popular retail store, where she had a top managerial position that she worked in for a very long time. She actually met her husband there, Richard, and they ended up getting married, and they ended up having their first daughter, Jennifer, in 1991, I believe. They had their first daughter, and then 4 years later they ended up having their son named David, and they were still living in California at the time, and Richard was deployed in the military, so they were moving back and forth across California all the time doing different things. And eventually he came out of the military and was unemployed for a while, and she knew she needed to get a job to provide for her family, and so she actually got offered a top position to move to Texas. So she decided to pack up her family and move to Texas for this job opportunity. And it was actually around the Fort Worth area, so they moved into a home, a little apartment that was out by Fort Worth. And if you are familiar with the Fort Worth area, familiar with the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you know that Dallas is a very different vibe than Fort Worth. Fort Worth is more kind of like country and cowboys and everything about cattle and everything, and Dallas is more the modern city-ish. So there's two different ranges of towns, and so they kind of lived on the outskirts of Fort Worth. It wasn't a great neighborhood. None of her family, her husband was really not happy there. It just wasn't the best situation, but she was trying to make the best of it for her family and to provide for her family. And that's really what she was working really hard to do with this top position that she got promoted to. So after a while, she finally decided to move the family, and they ended up moving to a really nice, up-and-coming neighborhood in Roanoke, Texas. Roanoke, Texas, I believe it's about 20 to 30-ish miles from from Fort Worth, I believe. So it's about a 25-30 minute drive from Fort Worth to Roanoke, Texas. But at the time, Roanoke, Texas was only home to a couple thousand people, and they moved into an up-and-coming neighborhood and actually got a really nice two-story home, like a $250,000 home, for very cheap at the time. So, at the time they were so excited. This was a great neighborhood. There was all these families moving in with children, and it was a great place to raise family, and they were happy. But as time wore on, they realized that they couldn't really afford this huge home when it came to all the expenses and paying for the mortgage and all the everything. They realized that it was becoming quite a burden to actually be able to afford this home. And so, as always, this kind of put a strain on her and Richard's marriage. It kind of just, their marriage started falling apart eventually, and they didn't know what to do. It was just very stressful. She started working more jobs. She was gone all the time. Richard was constantly having to take care of the kids and do everything with the kids, and the kids were growing up. She was missing out on a lot of their childhood, but she was doing all she could to be able to make those payments, because at the time her husband was not working. And then there was a period of time where she actually lost her job, and both her and her husband were unemployed and they had no income coming in, so she began working at Lane Bryant and also at Bed Bath & Beyond. So she was working 2 jobs at this time just to get like money on the table, food on the table for her family. So eventually, as it wore on, her and Richard ended up getting divorced. He moved away back to California. He never liked Texas. He was always a California guy. So he moved away to Texas, and they never really talked again. The kids never really saw him. She got full custody. When she requested full custody in court, he never filed for a lawyer or wanted like anything to do with them, so he was out of the picture. So again, now this house and her children, it was all on Susan to be able to provide for them. So again, she was working her jobs constantly. She was constantly gone. She was always working, always trying to give her children the best things possible. And as her children were growing up, at the time, Jennifer had become 17 and David was 13. And Jennifer found herself a lot having to take the role of Susan to David. She found herself having to be the mother figure, having to help clean, always having to take care of her brother because her mom was always gone at work. And at the time, she didn't realize that her mom was just trying to do what was best for her. But in that wake, Susan was out of her children's life a lot because she was trying to do the best that she could for them. And you know, as children are growing up, they want the coolest, newest, awesomest things. So Susan actually ended up purchasing phones for her children for gifts one year. And they were constantly going over the phone bill, over their data bill. So she was constantly racked up with all these prices that she just couldn't afford. But she promised herself that she would keep going, keep working, and keep striving to provide for her children. And that's what she did. But again, her daughter came to resent her and came to hate her for always being gone and making her do the chores, which she never did. Jennifer became such a rebel. She didn't want to clean. She didn't want to take care of her brother. She hated her mom for being gone all the time and never having any money. So therefore, she became very upset, and she became very not happy. She became not happy. And as David was growing up, he became violent at school. He was getting into fights. He was running around the neighborhood naked. And she just felt like she had no control of her children at this time. She had no idea. But as they continued to grow up in this home, they lived in the Parks of Roanoke on Oxford Drive. So it was a nice neighborhood. She was always trying to do the best that she could and just do everything that she possibly could. She, and eventually she ended up getting killed in the end by the people that she was doing all these things for, which is so tragic. So now that you know a little bit about Susan Bailey herself, I'm now going to kind of give you the background about Jennifer, the daughter, and the children, and kind of everything leading up to the murder. So as you know, at the time of the murder, Jennifer was 17 years old and David was 13. So at the time, you know, Jennifer was always noted as being pretty, as being kind. She was kind of a loner, but she did have a couple friends at school, but she was for the most part not very outgoing. Until she met a boy named Paul Henson Jr., who was 16 at the time, was a grade younger than her. So she met him her senior year, it was his junior year. And they started dating, and she finally felt like she had someone she could relate to. Now, Paul, on the other hand, was a very strange child. When the police went through his room, they found Satanism books, spells. He wanted to be a vampire. He considered himself a vampire. He was said to have 2 different personalities. He had his Paul personality, and then he had his Talos personality, which Talos would go crazy and do things and wanted to know what it would feel like to kill someone. And so he had expressed these feelings to Jennifer, that he wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. And they talked about that a lot. So then they also involved a 14-year-old girl named Marilee White, and she was apparently also thought that she was dating Paul as well. She was in love with Paul as well as Jennifer. And Paul told Marilee that his Paul personality was in love with Jennifer, but Talos was in love with Marilee, her. And so she thought this was totally fine. And so Paul continued to have sex with both girls, tell both girls that he loved her, switch back and forth into his 2 different personalities, and these 2 girls were fine with it. And the 3 of them eventually became very close, and he actually encouraged them to have sexual relations between themselves, and they had threesomes many times. So it was just a very creepy thing for such young people to be doing. And so eventually, around the time, it was in September of 2008, Jennifer was going to start an art college. She had graduated high school, and she was going to go off to art school while the rest of her friends continued high school. And once Paul had started kind of hanging around the house, Susan had noticed him and got this sense that he was just not a nice boy, that he was strange, he was into weird things, and he was not a good influence for Jennifer, and she didn't want Jennifer hanging around him. And so she told Jennifer that Paul was not allowed to come around the house. And this was same with Marilee's mother. She had the same feeling. She did not want her daughter around this boy either. And this upset Jennifer. This upset Jennifer so much because she felt like her mom was purposely punishing her. She would sneak Paul in all the time and have sex with him because her mom was gone so many times. She would disobey her mom, run away with him. Paul would run away from his house all the time and be reported as a runaway and be hiding at the Bailey's house. He was just, they had a very crazy relationship. And so it was in September of 2008 when Jennifer was supposed to set off onto art school. But she decided that she wasn't going to go because of this murder that was about to happen. So together, because of the resentment for all their parents and because they wanted to be together, the 4 kids, Marilee, Paul, Jennifer, and then Jennifer dragged her little brother David into it as well because David really looked up to Jennifer. She was his mother figure and he would do anything for her. So he got dragged into this and wanted to go along with it, and they formed a pact. They were all going to kill their parents and run away to Canada and live happily ever after with each other in Canada. So they started this plot in September of 2008, and they saw this murder as the only way that they could be together since their parents were refused for them to be together. So Marilee was planned to stab her sleeping mom. While her mom was sleeping one night, she was going to go in and stab her mom and then run away. Her plan actually went wrong as her mom awoke to a raised butcher knife. And Paul's plan, he was going to wait at his house for his parents and shoot them with a gun as they walked in. And so, and then the plan for... Then they were all going to come over to Jennifer's house and they were all going to kill Susan together. And they had this crazy plan in mind for what they were going to do. They were going to get some pudding, they were going to put a bunch of painkillers in it, try to poison her. If that didn't work, they had an electrical wire that had been frayed off and put in the pool so they could electrocute her. They had a baseball bat set up in case they needed to whack her over the head multiple times. And they had many knives hid around the house. They had one hid under the bed. They had them in the backyard. They had really thought this through and they had a way to kill her at any way she turned. So this was their plan and they were going to do this on a Tuesday. They had everything planned out for September the 25th, something. It was sometime in late September they were going to do this, and so they had this all planned out, and it was all gonna go down and they were going to just run away happily ever after and live in Canada. And this is where everything went wrong. So that's where I'm going to stop, because I did kind of I told you all the history and everything kind of leading up, the situation that kind of led up to the murder itself. And so in the next video I will go into the murder itself, how everything panned out, and then the charges that they are facing now and everything that happened in the repercussions of the murder. So I hope this intrigued you guys and gets you excited for part 2. I'm so excited. This case is so interesting. I feel like I was kind of all over the place, but I was trying to get like all my facts out and I kind of forgot stuff in some places, so I was going back. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for part 2 because it is coming very, very soon. And I'll see you guys on my next video. Bye guys.